Typically, when we think of genocide, we think of Rwanda, for example, right? There was interethnic violence between Hutu and Tutsi, where we saw on a daily basis on TV people actually either getting cut with a machete or getting shot. And that is typically what we view as genocide. But in Uganda, it was different. When General Yoweri Museveni seized power in 1986, and he observed that he was getting some resistance from primarily the northern part of Uganda, he came up with this idea, which was to confine 90% of the population in concentration camps. And in these camps, there was no food, there was no hydration, there was no sanitation, there was sexual violence by his soldiers who were supposedly protecting this population from the rebels who were fighting against him. The World Health Organization did a study ultimately in 2005 and found that in these camps there were more than 1,000 excess deaths per week. So if we go by that estimate alone, we would be talking about 52,000 people dead per year. And those camps lasted for at least 20 years, meaning it's quite possible 1 million people died. And the most shameful thing is that the Western countries that support General Museveni were aware of this. And why do I say this? Because John Egeland, who at the time was the Secretary of the United Nations Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, went to Uganda and he observed this and he called this the world's worst neglected crisis. And he wrote about it. And yet nothing was done by the United Nations or the countries that primarily support Museveni with financing for his budget, military training, and arms. And these countries are primarily the United States and the United Kingdom. That's why this documentary was referred to as a brilliant genocide. It was done in a very different manner that allowed Museveni to get away with it, at least up to date.
So the idea is that because Museveni has been a very strong U.S. ally, now that even though he's been a dictator essentially, I mean, he says he's democratically elected, but he's been in power for over 30 years now, the U.S. ignores this tragedy while then focusing on its neighbor, for example, President Bashir in Sudan, and obviously the conflict there, and for example, the Darfur situation has been highlighted by the world community, but Uganda is ignored, and it's because of this relationship with Museveni. Why is our relationship so strong? Why are we so allied as a U.S., I'm sorry, the U.S. country is so allied with Museveni as president?
Okay, for a number of reasons. One reason is that he has positioned himself as the U.S. ally in the war against Islamic quote-unquote terrorism. And primarily, as we see, Somalia is in a very chaotic position, very anarchic. And what Museveni did was that he volunteered Ugandan soldiers to police Somalia, to fight against al-Shabaab. And he stationed 10,000 Ugandan troops in Somalia. So the United States obviously would prefer to have Ugandan soldiers die in Somalia instead of American troops. So for that reason, he gets a blank check. But even if we look at the Somalia situation, and anybody can do this research, it's been documented that his own army, Museveni's army, has been fueling some of the violence in Somalia by attacking civilians and also by selling weapons to part of the elements that are fighting the Somali government. So in other words, Museveni used the Somali conflict as sort of a way to blackmail the United States, because he's threatening several times to withdraw Ugandan troops from Somalia anytime the United States raises the issues of human rights. That's the first part. Then the second part is that Uganda has intervened militarily many times in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And as a result of the Ugandan invasions into the Congo, there's been a continuous conflict in the Congo that's resulted in the deaths of more than 6 million people. But even though these atrocities are occurring in the Congo, there's some Western countries that have been mining resources from the Eastern Congo. So Museveni, even despite the death of millions of people in the Congo, is still being protected, even in the Congo, because there's some Western companies, including American companies and Canadian companies, that are benefiting from the resources of the Congo. And in the Congo, it's well known also because in 2005, the International Court of Justice ruled against Uganda and found Uganda liable for massacres in the Congo and plunder of resources, and ordered Uganda to pay Congo $10 billion. Not a dime has been paid. This story was widely ignored by most international media. And then the second thing that happened is this. The Congo referred the same alleged crimes to the International Criminal Court. And according to an article in the Wall Street Journal on June 8, 2006, it's a front page story, General Museveni himself contacted then UN Secretary General Kofi Annan and asked him to block that investigation. Now, I don't know what happened, but it seems to me that investigation was indeed blocked, because if the ICC had gone by the same set of facts used by the International Court of Justice that found Uganda liable, Museveni might have been indicted. So it's very cynical when you hear Western media talk about Bashir being indicted and being wanted by the ICC, when in fact, one of the Western countries must have played a role in blocking the ICC's own investigation of the atrocities committed by the Ugandan military in the Congo.
Absolutely, and you mentioned the prospect for resources, obviously such a major factor in the West's relationship to Africa, going back to the 19th century, obviously the colonial desire for resources, controlling resources.
Right.
What is it in Uganda? Is it oil in the north? Is that one of the major resources that the United States is after in its relationship with Museveni?
That is also the new factor. 5, 6, 7 years ago, Uganda discovered significant oil finds in the northern part of Uganda and in the western part of Uganda, and going into southern Sudan as well. So this is the gamble that the United States seems to have made. They would rather deal with General Museveni and give him a blank check for any atrocities in Uganda than deal with a democratically elected government in Uganda that would actually probably have to get parliamentary approval for a lot of these activities, at least in terms of deploying troops. Parliament would have to play a role in it, but right now, as it is, it's a decision that's made by one individual, and that's Yoweri Museveni. Whether it's deploying troops in Somalia, or deploying troops in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, or deploying troops in southern Sudan, where Ugandan troops are now, in fact, playing a very large role in the turmoil that's going on in southern Sudan, because Museveni favors President Salva Kiir against the former Vice President Riek Machar. Salva Kiir does not have an army of his own, so he relies on Uganda's military. And Museveni is not comfortable with Riek Machar being a part of the government in southern Sudan. So this one individual who's been in power going into 31 years now has been the cause of much destruction, much bloodshed, not only in Uganda, but in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, in South Sudan and in Rwanda as well. Because let's remember, before the massacres of 1994 in Rwanda, there had been ongoing war for 4 years after Uganda allowed elements of its army to invade from Uganda. It invaded October 1, 1990. So there was a war going on for 4 years until the presidential plane was shot down, as I mentioned earlier, and that sparked the genocide. So if you look at it directly, Uganda was in fact responsible for what ultimately resulted in the genocide in Rwanda as well. This unchecked militarism and the blank check from the United States and Great Britain has been very costly to the people of East and Central Africa.
Powerful, powerful stuff. Oof. All right, everybody, that is our show for you today. Remember, everyone, in this world, we are not told that we are loved enough. So I tell you all, I love you. I am Tyrell Ventura.
And I'm Tabitha Wallace.
Keep on watching the Hawks and have a great, great night, everybody.